How much power does the people have? This question has long been debated by political scientists in democratic countries. The people are very powerful. Then the demands of the people are not implemented. The government faces a major crisis. But what happens in countries like Russia? Democracy is not practiced well in Russia. This makes it slow for the demands of the Russian people to reach politicians. But the Russian people are still trying to voice their demands. Putin is very worried about the massive protests in Russia because the reaction of the people has always been decisive throughout world history. Even in the years when there was no democracy, kings were deposed when the people revolted. Putin thinks that if the Russian people start a big revolt, he might be removed from office. Putin has an even bigger fear: the possibility of the Russian people taking over the Kremlin palace after a big protest scares Putin very much. That's why he is cracking down very hard on all protests. But the Russian people never give up. There have been very creative actions in Russia today. These protests are very much supported by the Russian people. Putin is very worried about what is happening. As Anchor Top News team, we investigated the details of these creative actions in Russia for you. Our team's expert staff analyzed these events. Don't forget to support independent journalism to continue such news. You can use the super thanks button below the video if you are ready. Let's start. The protests in Russia have long been the talk of the world because Russian protesters have been doing everything to continue their protests since the beginning of the war. The Putin administration is trying to arrest all the protesters, but despite this, the protesters never give up. Their courage is admired all over the world. After Putin decided to invade Ukraine, Russian protesters immediately wanted to organize a protest march in Red Square. But the Russian police intervened very harshly and arrested everyone. After that, the Russian people decided to protest in a different way. Two methods were decided for this. The first method was to organize much larger protests. Then there are many people participating in protests. The Russian police are helpless. This makes it easier for the Russian protesters. Russian rioters secretly agree on social media accounts. When thousands of people take to the streets at the same time, the Russian police are helpless. Russian intelligence is making great efforts to learn about these protests early on, but Russian protesters are now quite experienced in this. The rebels have managed to secretly negotiate a contract. Putin has realized that he cannot fight the rebels by gathering intelligence. Increasingly fearful, Putin decided to radically increase security measures. Some special units of the Russian army have been assigned to Moscow. These military units are on duty in Moscow to suppress the protests. Their most important task is to protect the Kremlin palace. If the rebels move towards the Kremlin palace, the soldiers will enter. With the deployment of troops in Moscow was the biggest indication of Putin's fear. But no measure can deter the Russian rebels. The Russian rebels have another method. Russian rebels have started to take actions of symbolic importance. These actions, mostly carried out individually, are affecting the Russian people and attracting the attention of the whole world. These actions are aimed at uniting the Russian people against Putin. The percentage of Putin's supporters in Russia is falling every day. The Russian people want this war to end as soon as possible. However, the Putin administration is making a great effort to change the situation. Putin-controlled media outlets are constantly trying to manipulate the Russian people with propaganda. Russian rebels are taking symbolic actions to prevent this. One of these actions took place in the city of St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is the second largest city in Russia. In the city, there is a small monument to the Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko, born in the 19th century in Kiev and considered one of the most important poets of the region. Shevchenko worked in St. Petersburg for a while. That's why there is a monument to him in the city. Shevchenko is known for his pacifist and humanist poetry. Since some of his poems are written in Russian, is also very popular among the Russian people. 7 pro-peace Russian youth laid flowers at Shevchenko's monument. Those who saw the flowers at this monument took photos and shared them on social media. In a short time, these photos spread in Telegram groups and started to be covered by the media. Shortly afterwards, 7 Russian youth were detained by the police. Russian police are afraid even of flowers. Another protest in Russia was quite extraordinary. Several Russian women, organized on Telegram, decided to organize protests in different Russian cities. The protests in cities like Yekaterinburg, Magnitogorsk, Vladivostok, and Moscow attracted a lot of attention in Russia. These protests were very creative. Russian women in different cities went out alone, carrying banners with inscriptions on them alone. These women marched through the busiest squares of the cities. The women marched bravely and received great support from the public. The banners carried by the women read as follows: "Soldiers, come home. Peace now, not war. This is not our war. No more dots." Russian women were detained by the police shortly after they started walking on the streets, but their photos were shared everywhere. The courage of the Russian women was appreciated by everyone. These protests attracted a lot of attention. A journalist who posted a photo of the protest said, "Courage is contagious." These protests have further emboldened the anti-war forces in Russia. According to experts, these events could lead to a mass protest in Russia. The Russian people are now very angry. If the Russian people start a big uprising, they will be able to end this war. That would be the end of Putin. Since 1999, Putin has ruled Russia and has made great efforts to build a strong bond with the Russian people. But the Russian people no longer love him. Putin wanted to go down in history as a hero of Russia. He did everything he could for that. But the Russian people are now very angry with Putin. Putin is not seen as a hero by the Russian people. Putin has not achieved any of his goals. It is believed that Putin invaded Ukraine for his own political interests. That's why the Russian people blame Putin for the deaths of soldiers in the war. The death toll in the Russian army is about to reach 200,000. With so many soldiers dying, the anger against Putin is only growing. The Russian economy is also in a very bad situation because of this war. Russian citizens are having difficulties even to meet their basic needs. The Russian people are experiencing economic problems. Blamed Putin. Putin can't fix the Russian economy. Russians found out that Ukrainians were too focused on the southern part of Avdiivka and assaulted Ukrainian defenses to the east of Avdiivka. Ukrainians left their positions abandoning a piece of seemingly functional equipment, but as it turned out, it was a Trojan horse. So once the vehicle exploded and killed a third of the squad, Ukrainians got a perfect opportunity for a counterattack. Last time I told you that Russians increased the intensity of attacks to the northeast of Avdiivka and give Russians to the south an opportunity to finally establish control over the hills. However, it seems like Ukrainians refuse to play by their rules and continue to prioritize the defense of the highlands in front of Virginia at the expense of their positions in the lowlands. It seems like Russians started adapting by slowly turning their spoiling attacks into intense assaults. The main direction of these assaults became the small village of Wesela. Usually it is very hard to cross highways and open spaces, especially if the highway is located on a small embankment like in this case. The reason why Russians decided to penetrate Ukrainian defenses and cross the road at this particular point is simple. If you look at the topographic map, we can see that this section is located in the lowlands and right in front of the village that they control. This means that they can rapidly assault, giving Ukrainians very little time to detect and respond. Around a week ago, Russians managed to make a breakthrough and establish their positions in front of Vasily. Instead of taking control of this village, Russians made a prudent move and immediately assaulted Ukrainian positions on the hills in front of Krasnohorivka. In doing so, they were trying to cut supplies and reinforcements to the Ukrainian village in the lowlands. Ukrainians in turn assumed an active position in Vasily and tried to undercut Russians. Judging by the available footage in the first days, Ukrainians heavily used artillery and drones and later started conducting mechanized assaults. During this time, one Russian commander of detachments deployed near Avdiivka said that they managed to capture a trophy Western armored vehicle, but he said that later this vehicle exploded and killed Russian soldiers. Other military-affiliated people commented on this situation and said that this is how Ukrainians started making use of the broken equipment. They get it to an enemy position in a fake assault, leave it in front of this positions and imitate a retreat. And once the vehicle explodes and kills up to a third of the squad, they assault this enemy position once again and establish control over it. It looks like this is exactly what happened here, because later it was reported that Russians lost control over positions in front of Vasily and also had to retreat from the hills because Ukrainians effectively undercut them, leaving no room for supplies and reinforcements. The freshest reports say that Russians have finished regrouping and conducted a series of assaults to recapture what they lost. The footage shows that Ukrainians destroy with artillery fire one mini convoy of armored vehicles after another. So far, Ukrainians maintain control over the area in front of Vasily, although it looks like they cannot get to the highway itself because Russians have established tighter fire control. Overall, the high mobility of Ukrainian forces allowed Ukrainians to rapidly save the situation and eliminate the bridgehead that Russians formed in front of Krasnohorivka. A change of location is a very effective tool to confuse the enemy because in intense fights it is taken at face value. If you had been faced with an overwhelming fire, lost an armored vehicle and retreated, then it is likely because your attack failed. That is why this tactic works so well. But changing your location is important not only on the battlefield, but also in the digital world. This simple but very effective tactic immediately opens a vast array of possibilities that you probably never heard of. Real tensions between Israel and Iran spill over into Russian territory. Is Israel preparing itself for a third world war? Is sending troops and technological support to Ukrainian territory on Israel's agenda? Could developments that anger Putin change the course of the war? Since the beginning of the war, both the Ukrainian side and the Russian side have been constantly trying to maintain close diplomatic relations with countries outside the war in order to give themselves an advantage. The possibility that any state that can attract to their site can change the course of the war has focused the countries on acquiring allies from different geographies and attracting neutral countries to their side. When choosing their allies, countries pay attention to their geographical location, military power, and their power in international politics. Since the first months of the Russian-Ukrainian war, we have frequently heard the names of Iran, Turkey, Israel, and European states. In the Middle East, there are constant problems between Israel and other Muslim countries. The Islamic country that Israel has the most problems with in this region is Iran, which is governed by Sharia law. The exclusion of Iran from the world economy under the leadership of the United States and the imposition of an embargo. Iranian politics has been centered on Russia and China. Therefore, when the war started, Iran had no choice but to support Russia. Israel, on the other hand, remained neutral in the war due to its relations with both countries. With the recent developments, Israel has also broken its neutrality. The tensions and conflicts between Israel and Iran, which have been going on for years, have moved to the Ukrainian-Russian battlefield. UAVs and UCAVs, one of the most important tools of warfare of the last period, have demonstrated with their success on the battlefield what a great advantage the countries that own these tools will have. Israel was one of the first countries to develop this technology together with the United States. Considering Israel's a small population in the Middle East, we can better understand the importance of unmanned combat drones. It was one of the most striking points that Israel, which started to attack Iran with multiple unmanned warplanes last night, hit points in Iranian territory that were related to the Russia-Ukraine war. The military technology base that Russia and Iran built together was hit by these drones last night. It attacked regime positions in other regions, such as the military base in Isfahan. Israel did not target civilians and Iran tried to retaliate, but its technology was not enough to stop the Israeli attacks. The Israeli attack weakened the hand of Russia, whose allies are limited. The Israeli airstrike was also a hot topic on the world agenda. The United States, which years ago imposed a serious embargo on the Iranian state because of its desire to develop nuclear weapons, has again considered Israel's airstrikes last night in the context of nuclear weapons. It said these Israeli attacks were necessary for the security of the Middle East and Israel's own security. Israel has been very disturbed by this aggressive behavior of Iran in recent days. Recently, Iran's sale of its 1,000 Shahed-136 kamikaze drones to Russia and their effective use against Ukraine caused harsh statements in world politics. In response to the developments, Ukrainian President Zelensky said that the Iranian state was involved in the war by helping Russia. He stated that Iran should bear the consequences if it continues this attitude. Israel was also disturbed by Iran's support for Ukraine since Israel was technologically superior to Iran. Their resistance would have a greater impact on the course of the war. In the statements made by the Ukrainian ambassador to Israel, he announced that they would send UAVs and defense missiles to Ukraine in order to prevent Russian airstrikes on Ukraine. It was signaled that the aid would not stop there and that Israel would openly confront Russia. War analysts have begun to talk about the possibility of Israeli troops setting foot in Ukraine. As an example, he mentioned that since the beginning of the war, he had been having difficulties with electricity and medical issues and that this could not be resolved. Israel has made it clear that it stands by Ukraine and has decided to send hundreds of generators and medical equipment to Ukraine to help Ukraine with this unresolved problem. The Israeli army destroyed a convoy of 25 vehicles believed to have been sent to Iran through Iraq. Although there is no clear information about what is in the vehicles in the convoy, it is reported that there are technological materials sent by Russia for Iran. With the successful operations carried out by Israel in the last few days, it has been seen how successful it is in intelligence. Israel, which has sided with Ukraine, has so far not openly attacked Russia, but the damage Israel has inflicted on Iran, one of Russia's few allies, and the political pressure on Iran exerted by Azerbaijan and Turkey. Iran, one of Russia's allies, has been put in a very difficult position. It is very difficult to predict to what extent the Ukrainian-Israeli alliance, which emerged unexpectedly, will be in solidarity, what the decision to increase the number of troops will be and where these troops will be used. Experts are of the opinion that these troops will take part in the Ukrainian ranks against Russia. The statements made by the Israeli government point to the opinion of experts. The same government has been in power in Israel for a long time. It strengthens the hands of the decision-making mechanisms in the government. The increasing defense industry budget in recent years and the catching up of military technologies are among the political achievements of Netanyahu, who was in power knowing the difficulties of the region they live in. The state of Israel is constantly putting military issues on the agenda of the parliament in case of a third world war. Turkey, which is neutral like Israel, had tried to mediate between the two countries by maintaining its neutrality in the Ukraine-Russia war over the straits and grain exports. A recent developments, Turkey has started to lean towards the Ukrainian side. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak supported the coalition of Leopard 2A4 operators in Turkey. At the meeting where the minister introduced the coalition, everyone was surprised by the Turkish flag in the background. The Turkish defense industry is more experienced than the other members in repairing and modernizing Leopard tanks. Finally, the Polish minister said that they are in talks with countries that have these tanks to form a coalition of donors of modern armored weapons for Ukraine. By joining this coalition, Turkey has turned against its Black Sea neighbor, Russia. Russia is seeing new states against it, and its allies are losing power. It seems that the irresponsible behavior of its ally, Iran, will cause more trouble for Russia. There was another important development in Iran yesterday. A terrorist attack was carried out on the embassy of the Azerbaijani state, whose cognates live in the Tabriz region of Iran. In Tehran, a diplomat working in the Azerbaijani embassy died in the attack. Following this development, intensive diplomatic contact was established between Azerbaijan and Iran. The United States and Turkey reacted to the issue with statements and estates. The Republic of Turkey stated that it stands by Azerbaijan with all its support in the terrorist attack, with which relations have recently peaked. While other states warned the embassies in Tehran to be careful, some states temporarily stopped embassy services and stated that their citizens should not be in Iran. While all these developments were taking place, the Iranian media gave a microphone to the terrorist who carried out the attack, putting its ally, Russia, and itself in a difficult situation in the Russian-Iranian alliance while Russia invades Ukraine. The whole world has taken precautions due to Iran's irresponsible behavior. Any wrongdoing by Iran in the Middle East could be the beginning of many problems in the Middle East. The war has been going on for years. It could trigger a large-scale war. This situation can cause new waves of migration, as in Syria, and disrupt the production of countries that regularly produce. In other words, the mistake made by Iran may not only be limited to its own country, but also trigger a global crisis. All these developments have caused the focus of countries to turn to this region.